Montana Territory, 1879. The vast frontier sky darkened ominously above the endless plains as Quentin Calloway pulled his horse to a halt. At 25, he'd spent nearly a third of his life riding these unforgiving lands, the calluses on his hands as permanent as his distrust of attachments. Rain began to pelt down, cold and merciless, much like the world he'd come to understand. "Come on, Thunderbolt," he murmured to his dappled gray stallion. "Let's find shelter before this gets worse." His lean frame, hardened by years of breaking horses and driving cattle, tensed as lightning split the darkening sky. Quentin's green eyes scanned the horizon, his youthful, handsome face belying the wariness that lived within him. His light stubble caught droplets of rain as he pulled his hat lower. The frontier had taught him one unassailable truth: attachments were dangerous. The men he'd seen shot over women, land, or gold. The families he'd watched starve when crops failed. The abandoned homesteads that dotted these territories like gravestones. No, Quentin had decided long ago that a man survived longer when he traveled light and loved nothing. His parents' deaths from fever when he was 16 had only sealed this conviction. What Quentin wanted was simple enough: his own spread someday, cattle that answered to his brand, and enough money to ensure he never went hungry. What he needed, though he'd deny it fiercely, was something else entirely, something he refused to name even in his most honest moments. The storm intensified, driving sheets of rain against horse and rider. Quentin spotted a stand of cottonwoods in the distance, perhaps offering some protection. He urged Thunderbolt forward, the horse's hooves splashing through newly formed puddles. As they neared the trees, something unexpected caught his eye: a small covered wagon, its canvas top whipping violently in the wind, one wheel broken and listing dangerously to the side. But it wasn't the wagon that made Quentin pull up short. It was the woman. She huddled against the wagon's side, her dress soaked through, shoulders shaking with what he realized were sobs rather than shivers. Even through the downpour, he could see her hair, golden blonde locks now plastered against her head and back, and the pale blue of her sodden dress. Something about her vulnerability pierced through Quentin's carefully constructed armor. Before he could reconsider, he was dismounting, leading Thunderbolt closer. "Miss," he called over the howl of the wind. "You can't stay out here." She looked up, startled, revealing a face that caused Quentin to pause. Despite being streaked with tears and rain, her beauty was unmistakable: delicate features, striking blue eyes rimmed with long lashes, and a small, perfect mouth. She couldn't be more than 22. "Stay back," she warned, her voice breaking as she scrambled backward. Quentin stopped, raising his hands. "I mean no harm. This storm's getting worse. You'll catch your death out here." Lightning cracked directly overhead, causing the woman to flinch. Her wagon creaked ominously as the wind intensified. "My name's Quentin Calloway. I'm a drover heading north." He gestured to the darkening sky. "That wagon won't hold against this weather. There's a line shack about 2 miles east of here. Not much, but it's dry." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. Another powerful gust rocked the wagon, deciding for her. "Lily," she said finally. "Lily Lawrence." She glanced at the wagon. "Everything I own is in there. We can come back for it. Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe." Quentin extended his hand. When she took it, her fingers ice cold against his. Something shifted in Quentin's carefully ordered world. As he helped her onto Thunderbolt and felt her arms reluctantly encircle his waist, the storm around them seemed to mirror the sudden turbulence within him. "Your journey ends with me, Miss Lawrence," he said over his shoulder as they set off. "At least until this storm passes." He couldn't have known how prophetic those words would prove to be. The line shack was exactly as Quentin remembered: small, rough-hewn, but blessedly dry. He built a fire in the small stone hearth while Lily stood wrapped in his spare blanket, her own clothes hanging to dry. "What were you doing out there alone?" he asked, finally breaking the silence as flames began to warm the space. Lily's eyes reflected the dancing firelight. "Running," she answered simply. "From what?" "From whom?" she corrected. "My stepfather arranged a marriage to clear his gambling debts. I refused." Quentin nodded, understanding all too well how the frontier could force impossible choices on people. "Where were you headed?" "My aunt's in Helena. I've never met her, but she's my mother's sister." Lily looked down at her hands. "I had a map, supplies." I thought I could make it. That's courageous, Quentin said, surprising himself with his sincerity. Foolish, maybe, but courageous. A small smile touched Lily's lips, transforming her face. My mother used to say I had more courage than sense. She sounds wise. She was. Lily's smile faded. She died last winter. The rain pounded on the roof, filling the silence between them. Quentin found himself studying her, the quiet dignity in her posture despite her circumstances, the determination in her eyes. I can help you get to Helena, he said finally, the offer emerging before he'd fully considered it. It's on my way. Why would you do that? Lily asked, wariness returning to her expression. Because no one should face the frontier alone, Quentin answered, the words contradicting everything he'd believed about survival out here. That night, as Lily slept near the fire and Quentin kept watch from the doorway, he wondered what madness had possessed him to entangle himself in someone else's troubles. The frontier punished such weakness. And yet, looking at her sleeping form, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Morning brought clearing skies and the awkwardness of two strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance. They returned to Lily's wagon, salvaging what they could. Most of her possessions were soaked, but salvageable. As Quentin helped her pack the essentials on a Thunderbolt, she paused, holding a small daguerreotype. My parents, she explained, noticing his gaze. Before everything changed. The image showed a handsome couple, the woman bearing Lily's features, both smiling with unmistakable happiness. Something about their evident joy made Quentin uncomfortable. We should move, he said, turning away. Want to make the next water before nightfall. They traveled steadily for the next 3 days, settling into an unexpected rhythm. Quentin found himself explaining the land to Lily, which plants were edible, how to read weather from cloud patterns, ways to spot water in seemingly barren landscapes. She proved a quick study, absorbing his knowledge with an eagerness that both pleased and unsettled him. How did you learn all this? She asked on the third evening as they sat beside their small campfire, the stars blazing overhead. Quentin poked at the fire. Trial and error. And an old Blackfoot scout who took pity on a green kid about to get himself killed. You've been on your own a long time. It wasn't a question, but Quentin answered anyway. Since I was 16. Parents took fever. No siblings. I'm sorry, Lily said softly. It was a long time ago. Not so long, she countered. You can't be much older than 25. 25 last March, he confirmed, surprised by her perception. Old enough to know the score out here. And what is the score, Mr. Calloway? There was a hint of challenge in her voice. Quentin met her gaze across the fire. That the frontier doesn't forgive weakness. That depending on others is a luxury most can't afford. Is that why you're helping me? Because you can't afford the luxury? Her question caught him off guard. I'm helping you because it's the decent thing to do. And after Helena? What then? Then I continue north. Cattle Drive waiting in Billings. Lily nodded slowly. Alone again. It's simpler that way. She said nothing more, but something in her expression, a mixture of sadness and disagreement, stayed with Quentin long after she'd fallen asleep. The fourth day brought trouble. They'd stopped at a small trading post to replenish supplies when Quentin noticed 3 men watching Lily with undisguised interest. Their worn clothes and hard expressions marked them as the kind of drifters who followed opportunity, legal or otherwise. We need to leave, he murmured to Lily as he paid for their goods. She followed his gaze and nodded almost imperceptibly. They were halfway to Thunderbolt when the largest of the men stepped into their path. That's a mighty fine traveling companion you got there, he drawled, eyes fixed on Lily. Quentin shifted slightly, placing himself between Lily and the stranger. We're just passing through. Passing through. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Seems a waste. Why not stay a while? My friends and I could show the lady some hospitality. Step aside, Quentin said quietly, his hand dropping to the Colt revolver at his hip. The man's eyes narrowed, calculating the odds. His 2 companions had moved to flank them. 3 against 1, he observed. Poor odds for a hero. 4 against 3, came a new voice. An older man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached from the trading post. And I'm the law in these parts. The tension held for a moment before the leader spat on the ground. No harm in being friendly. He nodded to his companions, and they withdrew, disappearing around the building. The sheriff tipped his hat to Lily. Ma'am, Those boys been causing trouble up and down the territory. You folks might want to make yourselves scarce before they decide to test their luck. Appreciate the warning, Quentin said, extending his hand. Quentin Calloway. Sheriff Thomas Reed. The man's handshake was firm. Where you headed? Helena. The sheriff's expression grew serious. Bad business that way. Cattle rustlers hit the Campbell spread last week. 2 hands killed. They've been stopping travelers, looking for supplies. Might want to consider a different route. Quentin glanced at Lily, whose face had paled slightly. No choice. We've got business in Helena. Reed nodded. Then travel armed and alert. And maybe not alone. They departed immediately, pushing Thunderbolt harder than Quentin would have liked. By evening, they'd left the trading post far behind, but the sheriff's warning had cast a shadow over their journey. As they made camp that night, Quentin noticed Lily was unusually quiet. Something on your mind? He asked as he handed her a tin cup of coffee. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his. Those men today, and now rustlers ahead. She met his eyes directly. I'm putting you in danger. I was in danger long before I met you. Quentin replied with a half-smile. It's the nature of the territory. You could have left me at the trading post. Found me an escort heading to Helena. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? The question hung between them. Quentin found himself without a ready answer. At least, not one he was willing to voice. I said I'd get you to your aunt. I'm a man of my word. Lily studied him, seeming to search for something in his expression. There's more to you than you let on, Quentin Calloway. Her use of his given name, combined with the softness in her voice, created an intimacy that threatened the barriers he'd so carefully constructed. Quentin rose abruptly. I'll take first watch. You should rest. Later, as he sat with his back against a boulder and his rifle across his knees, Quentin confronted the uncomfortable truth he'd been avoiding. In less than a week, this woman had somehow worked her way past defenses that had served him for nearly a decade. Worse, he was beginning to question whether those defenses had protected him or merely isolated him. The next morning brought a new development. As they prepared to leave camp, Lily approached him with determination in her stride. Teach me to shoot, she said without preamble. Quentin paused in the midst of saddling Thunderbolt. What? You heard the sheriff. There's danger ahead. I won't be helpless if we're attacked. He studied her face, seeing not fear but resolve. After a moment, he nodded. Practical thinking. He withdrew the small derringer he kept as a backup from his saddlebag. We'll start with this. 2 shots, short range, but it'll stop a man if you hit something vital. For the next hour, he guided her through the basics of handling the small pistol, impressed by her focus despite her obvious discomfort with the weapon. When she finally hit the makeshift target he'd set up, her face lit with triumph. Not bad, he admitted. Keep practicing, and you might save both our hides someday. Lily carefully returned the pistol to him. Thank you for not dismissing the idea. Out here, survival isn't about strength. It's about adaptation. Quentin secured the weapon. You adapt quickly, Lily Lawrence. Her smile and response stirred something in him he'd long thought dormant. They continued their journey, now even more vigilant. The landscape grew more mountainous as they approached Helena, forcing them to navigate narrow passes and steep trails. The feeling of exposure weighed on Quentin, his instincts warning of unseen dangers. Those instincts proved correct on the 6th day. They were traversing a narrow valley when Quentin spotted dust on the ridge above them, riders moving parallel to their path. Don't look up, he instructed Lily quietly. But we've got company. To her credit, she didn't panic. The rustlers? Maybe. Or just curious locals. Quentin doubted the latter. Either way, we need cover. He guided Thunderbolt toward a stand of pines ahead, hoping to reach their shelter before the riders made their move. They were still 50 yards shy when shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Hold on, Quentin shouted, spurring Thunderbolt into a gallop. He felt Lily's arms tighten around his waist as they raced for the trees. More shots followed, but they reached the pines without being hit. Quentin dismounted quickly, pulling Lily down and leading Thunderbolt deeper into the cover. Stay here, he ordered, drawing his rifle. If I don't come back, take Thunderbolt and ride east. There's a homestead about 5 miles that way. Lily gripped his arm. You can't go out there alone. I'm just going to see what we're dealing with. He hesitated, then pressed the derringer into her hand. Remember what I taught you. Before she could protest further, he moved through the trees, using their cover to approach the direction from which the shots had come. He counted 4 riders now descending into the valley, rifles ready. Their confident approach suggested they believed their quarry wounded or pinned down. Quentin circled to flank them, finding position behind a large boulder. As the riders drew closer, he could hear their conversation. Easy pickings. Probably carrying cash if they're headed to Helena. What about the girl? Sutter said she was a pretty one. Sutter talks too much. We take what they have and move on. So they had been followed from the trading post, probably by one of the men who'd confronted them. Quentin's jaw tightened. 4 against 1 were poor odds, but surprise was on his side. He took careful aim at the lead rider and squeezed the trigger. The man toppled from his horse as the others scattered, returning fire wildly. Quentin used their confusion to change position, working his way around to catch them in a crossfire. The firefight that followed was brief but intense. Quentin managed to wound another rider before the remaining 2 retreated, dragging their injured companion with them. As silence fell over the valley once more, Quentin made his way back to where he'd left Lily, tense with the possibility that the attackers might have circled around. He found her exactly where he'd left her, the derringer gripped tightly in her hand. "They're gone," he said, relief evident in his voice. For now. Lily lowered the small pistol, her hands trembling slightly. "You're bleeding." Quentin glanced down, noticing for the first time the tear in his sleeve where a bullet had grazed his arm. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She moved toward him, her earlier fear replaced by determination. "Sit down and let me look at it." To his own surprise, Quentin complied. As Lily tended to his wound with gentle efficiency, using supplies from his saddlebag, he found himself studying her face, the concentration in her eyes, the small furrow between her brows. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father was a doctor before the war," she explained, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "He taught me a few things." "Your real father, not the stepfather?" Lily nodded. "He died at Shiloh. I was 12. The simple statement contained volumes of loss. Quentin found himself wanting to know more about her father, her life before the frontier, everything that had shaped the woman now binding his wound with such care. "We should move," he said instead, once she'd finished. "Those men might come back with reinforcements." They traveled through the night, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the shadows. By dawn, they were exhausted but had put considerable distance between themselves and their attackers. They made a cold camp in a sheltered ravine, neither willing to risk a fire that might be spotted. As they shared the last of their jerky, Lily broke the tense silence. "You saved my life back there." Quentin shook his head. "I endangered it in the first place. Should have been more careful at that trading post." "No." Her voice was firm. "I would have been alone when those men attacked if not for you. I owe you my life, Quentin Calloway." The intensity in her eyes made him uncomfortable. "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." She moved closer, her hand coming to rest on his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the frontier not forgiving weakness, about being alone. I think perhaps you've got it backward." "How's that?" he asked, acutely aware of her touch. "Out here, alone is weak. Together is strong." Her eyes held his. Those men today, they were together. And yet they ran when faced with just one man who had something to protect. Quentin wanted to dismiss her words, to retreat behind the walls of his long-held beliefs. But the events of the past week had already created cracks in those defenses. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "Isn't it?" Lily's hand remained on his. "What are you so afraid of losing, Quentin? You already live as though you have nothing." Her observation struck with devastating accuracy. Before he could formulate a response, exhaustion claimed them both, and they fell into uneasy sleep side by side beneath the wide Montana sky. They reached Helena 2 days later without further incident. The town had grown since Quentin's last visit. More buildings, more people, more evidence of civilization taking hold in the wilderness. As they rode down the main street, he felt an unexpected heaviness in his chest. "Do you know where your aunt lives?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lily nodded. "Spruce Street, near the church. She runs a millinery shop." They found the shop easily enough, a neat storefront with elegant hats displayed in the window. A bell jangled as they entered, and a stout woman with graying blonde hair emerged from the back room. "May I help you?" she asked pleasantly, then froze as she took in Lily's appearance. "Aunt Margaret." Lily stepped forward uncertainly. I'm Lily Lawrence, your sister Caroline's daughter. The woman's hand flew to her mouth. Lily? Good heavens. She rushed forward, embracing Lily with evident emotion. I received your letter only last week. I never expected you so soon. As the women exclaimed over each other, Quentin stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. He should feel relieved, mission accomplished, responsibility discharged. Instead, he felt adrift, as though something essential was being pulled away from him. Margaret finally noticed him. And who is this young man? This is Quentin Calloway, Lily said, turning toward him with a smile that made his chest tighten. He saved my life and brought me safely to you. Then we are forever in your debt, Mr. Calloway, Margaret declared, grasping his hand warmly. No debt, Quentin managed. Just doing what needed doing. An awkward silence fell. This was the moment to take his leave, to continue north as planned. Yet he found himself unable to move. You must stay for dinner, Margaret insisted. At the very least, let us offer you a proper meal before you continue your journey. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Lily interrupted, her eyes meeting his. Please, Quentin. He found himself accepting. Dinner at Margaret's comfortable home behind the shop was a stark contrast to the trail meals of the past week. Sitting at a proper table, surrounded by the trappings of domestic life, Quentin felt distinctly out of place. Yet Margaret's genuine hospitality and Lily's quiet presence across from him gradually eased his discomfort. As Margaret cleared the dishes, insisting they remain seated, Quentin knew the moment of departure could no longer be delayed. I should be going, he said, rising. Got to find accommodation before dark. Nonsense, Margaret declared, returning from the kitchen. We have a perfectly good guest room. You'll stay the night, at least. Before Quentin could protest, she continued. Besides, there's a matter I must discuss with you both. A letter arrived yesterday that concerns Lily. Lily straightened. From my stepfather? Margaret nodded grimly. He claims you stole valuable items before your departure. He's offering a reward for your return. Quentin's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. What kind of reward? Enough to tempt bounty hunters, Margaret sighed. And in a town this size, word travels fast. I took nothing but what was rightfully mine, Lily said, her voice tight with anger. My mother's jewelry, my own clothes. I believe you, dear. But Maxwell Lawrence has connections and money. That makes him dangerous. Quentin absorbed this new threat, his earlier plans dissolving in the face of it. Then Lily shouldn't stay in Helena. Not yet. If he's posted rewards, it won't take long for someone to make the connection. What do you suggest? Margaret asked, clearly relieved someone else was taking charge of the situation. Quentin looked at Lily, whose face reflected a mixture of fear and determination. I have friends north of here. A ranch where she could stay until this blows over. For how long? Lily asked. Until we can prove your stepfather's claims false. Or until he loses interest. Quentin rubbed his jaw. Men like him eventually find new targets for their spite. Margaret nodded slowly. It seems the wisest course. I've only just found you, Lily, but I couldn't bear to lose you to that man's machinations. Lily's eyes never left Quentin's face. And you? Will you stay? The question contained multitudes. Quentin found himself at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated when he'd first spotted a crying woman in a storm. I'll see you safely there, he said carefully. After that, I have obligations. Something like disappointment flickered across Lily's features before she nodded. Of course. You've already done more than could be expected. They departed Helena before dawn, traveling north toward the ranch owned by Quentin's former employer, James Harrington. The man had been good to Quentin when he was a green hand learning the trade, and he felt confident James would extend protection to Lily. The journey was tense, both of them aware that pursuit might already be underway. They avoided towns and kept to less traveled paths, making their progress slower but safer. On the third night, camped in a secluded grove, Lily broke the companionable silence that had settled between them. Tell me about this ranch we're heading to. Quentin poked at their small fire. The Double H. James runs about 3,000 head of cattle. Good man, fair employer. His wife Miriam is kind-hearted, always taking in strays. He smiled faintly. They'll welcome you. And they're your friends? Not just former employers. Closest thing to family I've had since my parents died, Quentin admitted. James taught me most of what I know about surviving out here. Yet you left. Quentin nodded slowly. A man needs to make his own way. Lily studied him across the fire. Is that what you're doing? Making your own way? Or just avoiding making a home? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Before he could formulate a response, she continued. I've watched you, Quentin. You know every skill needed to survive out here. You understand this land, respect it. You could have your own spread by now. Instead, you drift from job to job, never putting down roots. Not everyone wants roots, he countered, uncomfortable with her perception. Don't they? Or are some just afraid to want them? Quentin stood abruptly. I'll check the perimeter. He strode away from the fire, needing distance from both Lily and the uncomfortable truths she seemed to see so clearly. When he returned, she had already rolled herself in her blanket, seemingly asleep. Quentin sat heavily by the fire, his thoughts in turmoil. The journey that had begun as a simple act of decency had somehow become something far more complicated. Lily Lawrence had worked her way into the carefully constructed emptiness of his existence, filling it with questions he'd long avoided. The Double H came into view the following afternoon, a sprawling ranch house with several outbuildings, nestled in a valley rich with grazing land. Cattle dotted the surrounding hills, and smoke curled invitingly from the main house's chimney. As they approached, a figure emerged onto the porch, a tall man with silver at his temples, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile as he recognized his visitor. Quentin Calloway, as I live and breathe, James Harrington called, descending the steps to meet them. Quentin dismounted, clasping the older man's extended hand. James, good to see you. Likewise, boy. Miriam will be beside herself. James's attention shifted to Lily, still seated on Thunderbolt. And who might this young lady be? Lily Lawrence. She needs sanctuary, James. The rancher's expression grew serious as he helped Lily down from the horse. Any friend of Quentin's has sanctuary here, Miss Lawrence. No questions asked. Miriam Harrington proved every bit as welcoming as Quentin had promised, immediately taking Lily under her wing. By evening, Lily was installed in a comfortable bedroom, outfitted with fresh clothes borrowed from the Harrington's daughter, now married and living in Denver, and seated at their dining table as though she'd always belonged there. After dinner, while Lily helped Miriam with the dishes, James led Quentin onto the porch with 2 glasses of whiskey. Now tell me the real story, he said without preamble. Quentin related the events of the past 2 weeks, including the threat from Lily's stepfather. James listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. So she's in genuine danger, he concluded when Quentin finished. Yes, Maxwell Lawrence has money and influence, and he's vindictive enough to pursue her. James studied him over the rim of his glass. And your interest in this situation is purely chivalrous, I take it? Quentin shifted uncomfortably. She needed help. James's knowing expression suggested he saw more than Quentin wished to reveal. Well, she's welcome here as long as needed. What about you? Staying on. I've got that cattle drive waiting in Billings. Billings will still be there in a few weeks. James swirled his whiskey. Besides, I could use an extra hand. Losing 2 men to better offers last month. The offer was tempting, more tempting than Quentin wanted to admit. I'll think on it. Later that night, unable to sleep, Quentin stood on the porch watching the stars. The sound of the door opening behind him didn't surprise him. Somehow, he'd been expecting her. Beautiful night, Lily said softly, coming to stand beside him. He agreed. Different view than from a bedroll on the ground. Different, but no less beautiful. She turned to face him. The Harringtons are wonderful people. Told you they would be. You also told me you'd be leaving after bringing me here. Quentin kept his eyes on the distant mountains. James offered me work. Might stay on a while. He felt rather than saw her smile. I'm glad. They stood in companionable silence for a time before Lily spoke again. You know, when you found me in that storm and said my journey ended with you, I was terrified. I thought you might be worse than what I was running from. And now, her hand found his in the darkness. Now I'm beginning to think those words meant something else entirely. The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through Quentin's body. For once, he didn't fight it. Life at the Double H settled into an unexpected rhythm. Quentin returned to the familiar work of ranching, mending fences, doctoring cattle, breaking horses. Lily quickly made herself indispensable to Miriam, helping with household tasks and revealing a talent for bookkeeping that James immediately put to use organizing the ranch's accounts. 2 weeks passed with no sign of pursuit from Maxwell Lawrence. Quentin began to hope they'd overestimated the man's determination. Lily bloomed in the safety of the ranch, her natural vivacity emerging more each day. Quentin found himself seeking her company in the evenings, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to hopes for the future. It was during one such evening, as they walked along the creek that ran through the property, that something shifted between them. "What will you do when this is over?" Quentin asked. "When you're sure your stepfather has given up the search." Lily considered the question. "I'm not sure anymore. I thought I wanted to be with my aunt, to learn her business. But now," she looked around at the vast landscape. "I've come to love this place. The openness of it. The honesty. It gets in your blood," Quentin agreed. "Is that why you keep returning to it, even though you never stay?" He nodded slowly. "Partly. And the other part?" Quentin stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun cast a golden glow over her features, highlighting the beauty that had captivated him from their first meeting. "Fear, I suppose. Like you said that night by the fire. Fear of wanting roots." Lily stepped closer. "What are you afraid of losing, Quentin?" "Everything," he admitted, the word barely audible. "Everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. Parents, friends in the war. It seemed easier to love nothing. And now," her voice was soft, her eyes never leaving his. "Now I'm not so sure that strategy works anymore." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, as natural as the sunset behind them, as honest as the land they stood upon. Quentin pulled her closer, feeling something long frozen within him begin to thaw. When they finally parted, Lily's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I think I've been waiting for that since you found me in that storm." Quentin touched her cheek gently. "I think I have too. I just didn't know it." Their newfound happiness was shattered 3 days later when a rider arrived at the Double H, bringing news from Helena. Maxwell Lawrence has hired Pinkerton agents. James informed them grimly after speaking with the messenger. They've tracked Lily as far as the territorial road north of Helena. Quentin's jaw tightened. "How many?" "3 agents, plus Lawrence himself." Lily paled. "He came himself? He must be furious." "He's claiming theft of family heirlooms worth thousands," James continued. "Enough to involve the territorial authorities." Quentin paced the room. "We need to prove those claims false." "How?" Lily asked. "It's his word against mine, and he has influence with the territorial judge." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Miriam spoke up from where she'd been quietly listening. "There may be another way." All eyes turned to her. "Marriage." "Miriam." James looked confused. If Lily were married, her legal status would change. She would no longer be under her stepfather's guardianship in any capacity, and any property she had before marriage would legally become her husband's. Understanding dawned on James's face, making Lawrence's claims of theft irrelevant, since the property would now legally belong to Lily's husband. Quentin stared at Miriam, then at Lily, whose expression had become unreadable. "It would have to be immediately," Miriam continued, "before Lawrence arrives. And it would have to be properly registered with the territorial authorities." "James is a justice of the peace," Quentin said slowly. "He could perform the ceremony." "I could," James confirmed. "But who would?" He stopped as Quentin's intent became clear. "Oh." All eyes turned to Lily, whose face had flushed deeply. "This is rather sudden." "It would be a marriage of convenience," Quentin clarified quickly. "To protect you legally. Nothing more expected." Something flickered in Lily's eyes. Disappointment? "I see." An awkward silence descended. Finally, James cleared his throat. "Well, I'll leave you two to discuss this. Come, Miriam." As the Harringtons withdrew, Lily moved to the window, her back to Quentin. "A marriage of convenience," she repeated softly. Quentin approached her cautiously. "Lily, I didn't mean." She turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What did you mean, Quentin?" "Because 3 days ago by that creek, I thought, I hoped, I care for you," he said, the words inadequate for the emotions churning within him. "More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. But not enough to consider a real marriage." Quentin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not it. I just didn't want you to feel trapped. To feel like this was your only option. What if I want it to be my option?" Lily stepped closer, her gaze direct. "What if I want more than a legal arrangement?" The hope in her voice broke through the last of Quentin's defenses. He took her hands in his. then I would say that finding you in that storm was the best thing that ever happened to me. That these past weeks have shown me what I've been running from all these years wasn't pain. It was joy. He took a deep breath. I love you, Lily Lawrence. And I would be honored if you would marry me. Not for convenience, but for life. Tears spilled down Lily's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They were married the next morning in the Harrington's parlor. Miriam had worked through the night to alter one of her daughter's dresses for Lily, who stood radiant in pale blue silk that matched her eyes. Quentin wore his best shirt and the new vest Miriam had insisted on pressing for him. James performed the ceremony with dignity and evident pleasure, his voice filling the small room as he guided them through their vows. Do you, Quentin Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Quentin's eyes never left Lily's face. I do. And do you, Lily Lawrence, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Lily answered, her voice clear and certain. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. James smiled broadly. You may kiss your bride. The kiss they shared sealed more than a legal arrangement. It sealed a transformation that had been occurring since that stormy day when Quentin had found a crying woman beside a broken wagon. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. The ranch hands joined them for a feast Miriam had somehow managed to prepare despite the short notice. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the Double H well into the evening. It was near sunset when one of the hands spotted riders approaching from the east. For men, he reported to James. Riding hard. Quentin exchanged a glance with James. Lawrence. Seems likely. James turned to the assembled ranch hands. Boys, we may have some trouble. Nothing to concern yourselves with, but I'd appreciate if you'd make yourselves visible. The men nodded, understanding immediately. They dispersed strategically around the yard, rifles casually but visibly present. Quentin turned to Lily. Stay inside with Miriam. No. Her voice was firm. He was my stepfather. I'll face him with you. Before Quentin could argue, the riders had reached the yard. The man in the lead dismounted first, tall, expensively dressed, with a coldness to his features that matched Lily's descriptions. Maxwell Lawrence had arrived. Mr. Lawrence, James called, stepping forward. This is private property. State your business. Lawrence's gaze swept past James, fixing on Lily who stood beside Quentin on the porch. My business is with my stepdaughter. She has stolen valuable property from my household. That's a lie, Lily called, her voice stronger than Quentin had expected. The territorial authorities may disagree, Lawrence said smoothly, gesturing to one of his companions who produced an official-looking document. I have a warrant for her arrest. Quentin stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lily. That warrant's no longer valid. Lawrence's eyes narrowed. And you are? Quentin Calloway, Lily's husband. The news clearly caught Lawrence by surprise. Husband. James moved to stand beside Quentin. Married this morning, by me, in my capacity as Justice of the Peace. All legal and properly registered. He produced the marriage certificate. As you can see, your stepdaughter is now Mrs. Calloway. Any property she might have taken, which I understand was rightfully hers to begin with, is now legally her husband's property. Lawrence's face darkened with anger. This is preposterous. The marriage is clearly a ruse to circumvent justice. The law is the law, Mr. Lawrence, James said mildly. And the law says a woman's property becomes her husband's upon marriage. You can take it up with the territorial court if you wish, but I believe you'll find yourself on shaky legal ground. One of the men with Lawrence, clearly one of the Pinkerton agents, leaned in to speak quietly in his ear. Lawrence's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Very well, he said finally. Keep the jewelry. It's worthless to me. But know this, Lily, you are no longer welcome in any home or business of mine. You've made your choice. I have, Lily agreed, stepping forward to take Quentin's hand. And I couldn't be happier with it. Lawrence's mouth tightened. Without another word, he remounted his horse, signaling his companions to do the same. As they rode away, Quentin felt Lily sag slightly against him. He's really gone, she murmured. It's over. Quentin wrapped his arm around her waist. Not over. Just beginning. That night, as they lay together in the small cabin James had insisted they take as a wedding gift, Quentin held Lily close, marveling at the turn his life had taken. What are you thinking? She asked, her head resting on his chest. That I was wrong. About everything important. She propped herself up to look at him. How so? I thought the frontier was about surviving alone. About not needing anyone or anything. His hand traced the curve of her cheek. But it's not. It's about building something lasting in a place that tries to take everything from you. It's about finding someone to face it with. Lily smiled softly. Together is strong. Together is strong, he agreed, drawing her closer. Spring arrived in Montana territory, bringing new life to the land. The Double H flourished under James's direction and Quentin's increasingly capable management. The older man had begun talking of retirement, of passing more responsibility to the young couple who had become like family. Lily had transformed the ranch house with her touch, creating a home where before there had merely been shelter. Her correspondence with Aunt Margaret had resulted in a thriving side business selling handcrafted items from the ranch to Helena's growing population. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, Lily took Quentin's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. We'll need to expand this cabin before winter, she said, her eyes bright with meaning. Understanding dawned on Quentin's face. Are you certain? She nodded, her smile radiant. Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday. By Christmas, there will be 3 of us. Quentin pulled her into his arms, his heart fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. From the lonely cowboy who had found a crying woman in a storm to the husband and soon-to-be father building a future on land he loved, the transformation was complete. Remember what you said to me that day? Lily asked, her arms around his neck. When you found me in the rain? Quentin smiled, recalling the words that had proved more prophetic than he could have known. Your journey ends with me. It didn't end, Lily corrected gently. It began. As the sun sank below the Montana horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Quentin Calloway held his wife close and marveled at how a single moment of compassion could change everything. The frontier remained as challenging as ever, but he no longer faced it alone. Together, they were building something neither of them had dared to dream of, a home, a family, a love strong enough to tame the wilderness both around and within them.